So what happens then? We try to manifest big things, money, a new relationship, a business, but we can't even follow a small instruction we gave ourselves. I remember when I got on a bicycle for the first time as a kid. It was red, I remember, and at first, you know how it is, right? They put training wheels on the back of the bike and you start moving slowly. You fall, you scrape yourself, you learn to keep your balance step by step. And well, think about it. It wouldn't make any sense to try going down a steep street at full speed on your first day if you don't even know how to stay upright, right? So, that's exactly what's happening with a lot of people when they try to manifest. Why? Because they want to control reality, they want to attract money, relationships, opportunities, but they still haven't mastered the most basic level of the game. Right? We want to run before we learn to walk. And that's precisely the problem because we get desperate. Do you agree? Because there are thousands of videos about manifestation, thousands of methods, visualizations, robotic affirmations, and all these things we learn, but almost no one talks about level one. And it's this prerequisite, without which everything else becomes much more difficult. The funny thing is that you see it every day when you look in the mirror. It's the ego. So, if I could list this for you, mastering reality in a practical guide, it would go something like this. First, it would be mastering the ego, then consciously choosing who you want to be, and as a consequence, beginning to master your reality. That's why in this video, I don't want to teach you just another manifestation technique. Instead, I want to first teach you how to develop the ability that makes all the other techniques work for you, but much better. Because look at this. True power doesn't lie in controlling the outside world. It lies in no longer being controlled by your inner world, and I'm going to elaborate on that right now. Paracelsus, one of the most important alchemists and occultists in history. This man wrote a phrase back in the 1500s that says, "Let no one belong to another who can be his own master." And I really like it because it tells you if you are not able to govern yourself from within, you will end up being governed either by circumstances or by others out there. And most people live exactly like that. They go through life reacting, getting angry, worrying, getting distracted, seeking immediate pleasure as if someone else were making those decisions for them. Now, what does this have to do with the ego? What is the ego really? Because when we hear this word, when I used to hear it, I remember. I used to think it was something. That was when you described someone as arrogant, overbearing, and egocentric. But in metaphysics, it's viewed differently. See how interesting this is. Practically all ancient traditions had a different name for the ego. If you look at Hinduism, there's something known as Hamkara, which is the identity that believes it's separate from the whole. You look at the Toltecs, for example. They called it the parasite of the mind, that automatic voice that lives off fear and judgment. For traditional religion, there's the demon, the devil, doubt, the one that divides, that separates you from the divine, that keeps you away from the divine. And then there's neuroscience, which tells you that there's a part of your brain that goes on autopilot. When it starts to obsess over the past, over what will happen in the future, or when it clings to this identity, so the names change. But they all point to the same experience. That character who says, "That's just how I am, the same thing always happens to me, that's my personality, I can't change anymore, I'm too old, I'm too old." And this is where metaphysics makes a fascinating statement because it tells you that you are not the character, you are the consciousness that is using that character. Imagine a carriage like Cinderella's. I've watched that movie like 300 times lately with my little one, that's why it comes to mind. Think of this carriage as if it were the body, as if it were your ego, and it's the vehicle with which you go through this experience. But the one who is really driving is you. It's the consciousness inside it. And the problem is that most people spend their whole lives believing they are the entire carriage, forgetting that they have always been the driver. Another simple example, when I was a kid, for example, I used to play a lot of Nintendo. Back then, they were cartridges. I would put in the Mario 3 cartridge, grab the controller, and play for hours being Mario, but you're never really Mario, you know? Mario could lose lives, he could fall, he changed outfits, but it was always you holding the controller, right? Well, it's the same here. Raul, Maria, Manuel, that's the character, that's the avatar. But the one who really inhabits it is consciousness, you know? It's the I am. And that avatar, that Mario Bros. Character, that vehicle has been programmed since you came into this world. And we all receive programs, some good programs, other more limited programs, and some programs that aren't so gentle. And who are the programmers? Well, the family, television, the country where you happen to be born, and above all these phrases that you heard over and over again while you were growing up and that we still keep repeating. All of that was shaping an identity until the ego becomes convinced that that's what it is. And this is where the real problem begins, because the ego only knows one reality, it only knows its own reality, you know? It can't see beyond the story it has built about itself, what it has always told itself. That's why it clings so much to being right, to reacting automatically, to defending its beliefs passionately, you know? To seeking immediate pleasure and avoiding any discomfort. Right? Because actually, think about it. Its priority has never been to wake up. Its only priority is to survive, that's all. And that's where the battle begins, because while your consciousness wants to grow and expand, the ego just wants to stay exactly where it is, comfortable. Because what is familiar is what gives it security. That's why so many people say they want to change and end up exactly in the same place, but it's not because their desire isn't big or strong enough. What happens is that they made the decision, but the ego took control again, took the wheel again. Right now, if you've ever had a little dog, for example, you know how that is, right? The little dog comes to your house and just does whatever it wants, right? It gets on the couch, chews on the leg of the living room table, breaks things, bites your shoes, and steals your socks. And it seems like it never listens, you know? It's really disobedient. But tell me something. Does that mean it's a bad dog? Well, of course not, right? It simply means that it hasn't been properly trained yet. It hasn't been educated yet. Well, that's what happens with the ego. It's the same thing. That's why I want to challenge an idea that's become really popular over the years. A lot of people say you have to kill the ego. They say you have to eliminate the ego. You have to kill it. No. Well, the truth is that I don't agree with that because I don't think the ego is the enemy, you know? Because you arrive and it's part of you, I see it mostly as a tool, you know? Because it's the vehicle with which you experience this reality. We don't come to destroy it, we come to train it, we come to educate it, you know? It's like with that little dog or a beautiful wild horse. You wouldn't kill it, you'd train it instead, right? There's a Zen story that teaches you this in a masterful way. Maybe you've already heard it. And the story goes that one day, a very powerful warrior comes to visit a master, and the warrior asks him, "Sir, what is heaven and what is hell?" The wise man looks at him and starts saying things to him, starts insulting him and tells him he was a coward, that he was ugly, that he was fat, that he was useless, mediocre, and weak, and says all sorts of things to him, and the warrior gets angry. You know, he draws his sword, says that's enough, and is about to kill him. And then the master very calmly turns around and says to him, "That is hell." The warrior freezes and understands the lesson, puts away his katana, bows his head, and kneels before the wise man. The master observes him and serenely says, "And that is heaven, so do you realize?" How? The enemy was never the master. The enemy was that part of the warrior that reacted without realizing it out of impulse. And that's the same thing the ego does. As long as the ego controls your reactions, it's going to keep controlling your life. Therefore, more hell, as the monk said, and what you want is heaven, right? That's why I told you at the beginning that before you try to control your reality, you first have to learn to control yourself. Because mastering the ego doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means to stop reacting automatically. It's about developing the ability to consciously choose how to act, even if part of you, the ego, tells you to do exactly the opposite. And every time the ego wants one thing and you choose something else, you're strengthening the observer. And little by little, you stop being a slave to those impulses. That is true self-mastery. This is what Paracelsus was referring to. Okay, Raul, I get it now. Now tell me what I should do. Well, let me share with you some practices you can start using today because there is only now. Okay, and first of all, well, it's meditation. Those who know me will say, I knew you were going to say that, Raul. You know, I already knew you were going to start there because for me, honestly, meditation isn't optional, It's more of a requirement, right? Because trying to manifest something without training your attention is like wanting to install a new app on a phone that doesn't have any memory left that's overloaded. And it's not because the app is bad or the phone doesn't work anymore. The problem is that the system is overloaded. We live surrounded by noise, always checking WhatsApp, the news, work, whether Ronaldo said this, whether Messi did that, whether the politician said something. And with all that noise, we try to create a new reality. And what meditation does is exactly the opposite of all that. It takes your attention away from all that external stuff and brings it back to you. That's why it's so powerful. And something very interesting happens there, because when you have this ability to sit in silence for 10 minutes, you start to realize who's used to being in control. That's where the ego is revealed. What happens? An itch appears, you remember something you have to do, you feel like checking your phone, you want to go to the bathroom, the washing machine, the mail, the food, and it seems like everything is more important than just staying still, sitting there for a little while. That's not you. That's the ego trying to regain control. And every minute that you manage to stay seated, that you can stay there without obeying those impulses, well, it's a minute in which you strengthen your ability to direct it. That's why, in addition to my morning anchor, which is a meditation we do at the metaphysical school every day very early, I also sometimes like to meditate after working out at the gym. Because it's uncomfortable, because it's a place full of noise, it's full of people doing Zumba and other things. And for me, it's a challenge because while everything around me is moving and noisy, I practice staying still. That's also mastering the ego. Because it tells me things, like get up already, you look ridiculous. What are people going to say about you? That you're just sitting there. I'm not in a lotus position, but I'm sitting calmly with my eyes closed. And if I can just sit there calmly and quietly, well, that's all I need. Yeah? Now, if you want to look at it from a spiritual and mystical point of view, well, remember Jesus. What did Jesus say? When you pray, go into your room and close the door. But Jesus didn't mean that you should go hide in a room. He was actually talking about closing the door to your physical senses so you can imagine, feel better, and connect with an inner space where transformation happens. So, meditation. Now, another tool, learning to master your impulses, to train them. Why is that? Because look, the body will always want something. It always needs something. Sometimes it will ask you for food, obviously every day. It will ask you for comfort. It will ask you for pleasure. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with those impulses. The problem is when those impulses are the ones making decisions for you. That's why, if you notice, the great traditions practice fasting, for example. Yes, and not because going hungry gives you magical powers, but because it trains something much more important, which is willpower. Your body tells you, hey, I'm hungry. And you tell it, wait, not yet. For example, personally, I do 16-hour fasts. But what's important isn't the hours or bragging about how long you can go without eating. No, that's not what it's about. It's about developing the ability to decide consciously when to act and when not to. And this goes beyond just food. It also applies, for example, to the urge to check your phone. You can leave your phone there for a while. A few minutes, nothing's going to happen to you. Or when someone responds to you rudely and you feel the need to answer back even worse so they don't get the upper hand. Or when you want to quit a project because you just aren't in the mood today. Or when, for example, the sexual impulse arises and that energy is wasted. That energy is so powerful when you can channel it into something creative, although that's a topic for another video because it's incredibly powerful. So the issue isn't the impulses. The problem arises when we let those impulses determine the course we want our lives to take. So, mastering impulses. Another topic. Embracing small discomforts. This one is going to be very simple and it's powerful because you purposely put yourself in uncomfortable situations, you know? And not because suffering is a good thing, but because these small discomforts strengthen your ability to choose. You take the regular stairs instead of the escalator. You'll see all the escalators crowded and the regular stairs empty. Why? Because it's more comfortable. You can leave your phone far away while you work. Walk from one place to another without your headphones on. Finish your shower with really cold water. So there are small details, little things that help you do what? Train your willpower. That's the goal, because the ego will always look for the easiest path and immediate satisfaction. And every time you consciously choose a direction, you're showing who's really in charge. It's not the stairs you choose that change your life. It's not the cold shower. It's becoming someone who follows through. It's about obeying your own decisions. And that's worth so much more than any manifestation technique you could learn. Now I'm going to leave you with one last thing. Your word becomes law. That's the most important of all, because look at this. The mind is always observing one thing. Do you keep your word or not? Because I guess tonight you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start running at 5 in the morning. At that moment, you made a deal with yourself, right? And tomorrow there are only two options. Either you keep your word or you break the agreement. And what happens is that when you break that agreement over and over again, well, your mind stops trusting you. It starts to interpret that your words mean absolutely nothing, that when you say, I'm going to do it, it actually means I'm too lazy, or maybe, or I never do it anyway. And then, what happens? We intend to manifest big things, money, a new relationship, a business. But we're not even capable of following a small instruction we gave ourselves. Do you realize the contradiction there? So, again, it's not about getting up early and going for a run. That's the least important thing. Forget about that. It's about building a relationship of trust between your consciousness and your body. So that when you give an instruction, when you give an order, your body responds. So that when you make a decision, you carry it out even if you don't feel like it. Because think about it. A person who can't trust their own word will hardly be able to maintain a new state of consciousness. That's what we learned from Neville. Enough time to be able to transform their reality. So what can you do? Start with small things. If you say you'll exercise, do it. If you say you're going to call your dad or your mom, call them. If you say you're going to do something, do it. The important thing is that your mind rediscovers that when you say something, it gets done. That's where true self-mastery begins. So here are some practical tips for you to apply today. Because the present is all there is. So the next time you think about manifestation, before you ask yourself which technique to use, it's better to ask yourself, who is making the decisions in my life? My consciousness or my ego? And another thing, that answer is very likely to explain the reality you're experiencing today. And remember the bicycle we started this video with. You can't go down a hill at full speed without first learning how to keep your balance. Alright, so first master yourself and then reality will start to respond in a completely different way. So, if this kind of content resonates with you and you liked it and want to start applying these principles in your daily life, I'll leave a link below to our WhatsApp group for updates. There are already more than 1,000 of us. There I share tips and information about the metaphysical school. And I also want to tell you that in a week we're going to have our second edition of the Metaphysical Retreat inside the Metaphysical School on School, so stay tuned. We are going to cover truly transformative topics: reprogramming, Kabbalah, hymn, conscious breathing, and more. So make sure to stay tuned. Alright? And now, thank you so much for making it this far. If this video brought you value, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, anything at all. I would love to read your thoughts. I love you very much, and I'm sending you a big strong hug. And remember this, the day you can give yourself an order and obey it, that same day you'll discover that you can also give a different direction to your entire reality. So thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video program. See you soon.